Hi everybody, Dr. Michael Craig, and this is the Logical Soul Life Coach Certification Training Introduction meeting. So tonight I'm just going to give you a couple of things. I'm going to get you an idea of what the Logical Soul is, how the Logical Soul Life Coach training differs from a lot of other training out there, and then I'm going to give you sort of an outline of the course and a demonstration of Logical Soul for some of you who have not seen how it works or what it is. So the Logical Soul is a method that allows anyone to access or contact and access those deep-rooted hidden decisions that lie within that run your life, to change those decisions and to allow an inner transformation to take place such that outer reality is different. For example, you have, issues about money. Anybody here have issues about money? A few. So the inner reality is that there's a very good reason, probably several good reasons why money is not coming to you in one way or the other, or why you're not taking action towards money, or why you're not accepting money, or you don't feel you deserve money, or something. You know what I'm saying? So there's always an inner reality that says, that dictates to you, this is a decision I've made about life itself. And that decision pretty much is locked away in your subconscious and is rarely accessible. What I discovered is that there's a way of getting access, and this is something that happened by accident back in the early 90s. I was a chiropractor, and I did a lot of work with people trying to figure out why some people held their adjustments and why some people did not. Why some people got better, why some people did not. I began to expand that definition of illness to look at all of life parameters. For example, life relationships, money, well-being, abundance, all these things related to a person's well-being overall. And in expanding that, I began to realize that there's all sorts of things. There's a common denominator that lies underneath that, and it has to do something with decisions. I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, but at the time as a chiropractor, I was using something called applied kinesiology, which some people know it as muscle testing. It's a way you test your arm and you get a yes or no. Most everybody here is familiar with that. Yes? Okay. And by doing that, I was able to get feedback, yes, no, finding out some amazing things subconsciously. But usually I would find out, say for example, we had something to do with relationships. Somebody said, well, I want a relationship. I want to have a loving relationship. And they would test no. Now in the past, I would do things like hypnosis or affirmations or some sort of thing where we would try to bypass that negativity, try to get them to a point to where they were stable in a new relationship or thinking about a new relationship so they could accept it or what have you. And this can do with money. It could also do with health. It could do with have to do with just about anything in life. Relationships, health, and money usually are the main issues that people go through. So I began to look at that and I said, what is it that's the common denominator that stops us or stops the people I'm working with? And in my own life, it had to do with money and well-being and abundance and all that, because I was stuck there. So I kept looking at what is the common denominator that keeps us stuck, keeps me and people I work with stuck. And I began to realize that we share a common denominator, and that is the decisions. And these decisions are tucked away. They're hidden decisions, and most of them are inaccessible. Long story short, I was working with someone. It's in my book called The Logical Soul. I was working with her, and I was thinking about going into business. We were going to go into corporations and do some talks and work in corporations, that type of thing. And I thought, well, that's kind of neat. She's got an inroads to that. And I thought, well, we could do a partnership, teach some things, give some workshops, do some things like that, make some money. I thought ahead of time, well, maybe we should test to find out if we're compatible, if this is going to work. Muscle test, you can find out whether or not you're going to be successful before you ever take a step. And I realized that's the most prudent thing to do, because I didn't want to go into a venture with someone without, and then later on realize this was a mistake or it's not going to work out, something like that. So we started muscle testing, started getting into some deep stuff. I'd known this person for a while, so it wasn't an issue to find out things that were going on with her, but some things just started coming up that surprised me. And I just asked her permission, is it okay if we look a little deeper? She said, yeah. And so I just asked a few deeper questions. And suddenly there was this explosion of like something happened, because I had asked a question and I reached that block where I normally reach, where I would just sort of leave people alone and say, well, we can't get beyond that. Like say relationships. Well, I want relationships, and it kept testing weak. And before I would just leave it alone. I would say, okay, we'll work on it, and after a week or so come back and we'll retest. knowing that probably that's not going to happen. Because if someone is at that level to where it's weak, they make a statement, for example, I choose to have a loving relationship, and it goes weak, chances of that changing on its own are slim to none. Same thing with money, and a lot of times with health as well. So we reached that point in the conversation where I said, I choose to make money with, and she kept testing weak. She couldn't make money with me or in the corporation or something. She could make money by herself, but somehow in a relationship it didn't work, and blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, that's not going to work. If I go, we try to do this together, and you're weak on that. I can't remember if I was weak also. But I do remember I was going to work with her. She agreed to that. It's okay. We tested that, found out she was weak. I reached the point where it was kept getting weak, and I kept saying, well, what do I do? What do I do? And I decided to just forge ahead, and I started asking questions like, is there access to get to this decision? And there was a yes on that. I said, and knowing the conscious and the subconscious have two different realities. They're actually two different beings in the way I do this work. I asked, do you allow Kathy, well, let's call her Kathy, do you allow Kathy access to this program? And it said no. It said no. And so she was testing weak on that. There was no access, or she didn't have access as a conscious person, didn't have access to change that decision. And you'll see how this works when we do a session. And that was when I began to ask questions like, well, who has access? And I began to delve into the idea that somebody has access, but it just wasn't her. And I started looking at who does have access, who has access. We found an answer, and then suddenly there was this explosion of energy. She started really going through some emotion, started freaking out a little bit. I didn't know what to do. It was like having a tiger by the tail, and I'm running around through the woods. I'm going, what I do now? In the cartoons when the guy's going through the woods, he's holding up, going up and down, and I just didn't know what to do. Couldn't let go, couldn't stop it. So, long story short, I tried to get her as stable as I could. Did some acupressure points and did this and that, and said, okay, now you're stable. Hypnotize her, whatever. Didn't work. So, I got her as stable as I could. Took a few hours, and then I went home and. Later on, her boyfriend called me up. She was dating somebody at the time. He says, what have you done to Kathy? I said, what do you mean? She's crazy. She's a wreck. She's nuts. What have you done to her? I said, oops. I don't know. I don't know what I did. So I spent the whole next day, and probably half of the day after that, working with her, getting to where she's stable, to where she was feeling comfortable about this whole breakthrough thing. And afterwards, after about a day and a half of this, her whole life had changed. She had totally shifted to where she started just being happy all the time. Her energy was up. She started feeling productive, and she came back and said, "This is the greatest stuff I've ever experienced." What did you do? I don't know. I said, "I don't know. I don't know what I did. I just did some things and tested some statements, and that's what happened." And she said, "This is the greatest thing since, fried rice or whatever." I didn't know what to say because I didn't know what I did. It's typical. So, and I didn't even know what to call it at the time. It took me like 10 years to finally figure out a name called the logical soul. Until then, I was calling it something like personal congruence or something, which didn't make a lot of sense. But she was, and I saw the power of this. And then she got together with my wife and a few other friends, and they got this little group together, and they did all these experiments doing this type of work. And I was like, great, go for it. I didn't know what to tell them. I was doing some research. Then eventually I began to discover that it didn't take so long. It didn't take a day and a half. It didn't take 2 days. I could do it in an hour and a half or 3 hours. And then it was boiled down to an hour. And now I'm to the point where my wife and I do sessions. It takes about 5 minutes because we know exactly what to go to. It's not this exploration process where you have to look and see, where am I going to get there? We just go directly to it. I call it the logical soul because there is a process whereby the soul has its own logic. This is my understanding. The soul has its own logic. We may not know what that logic is, but let's see, I had something right here. So if there's a logic in the soul, it's not the type of logic that we normally think of as logic. Normally we think of logic as A plus B equals C, 1 plus 2 equals 3, that type of logic. It's almost mathematical. In the soul, there's a type of mathematics going on, but it's very different. Actually, it's very concrete. It's based on direct experience and things that a child would find logical. I remember as a child, I was telling on myself. I was a child and I was coming up with some things like, the wise men were going to see the baby Jesus, and my dad recorded this. Is the only way I know. I was about 3 years old. My dad was recording it, and I was saying, well, he brought gold and frankincense and myrrh and perfume. He said, well, why the perfume? Because, baby stinks. I have to bring something to clean them up. And so he said, well, isn't that 4 gifts? And I thought for a minute. I said, well, there are 4 wise men. Makes sense to a child, right? I mean, if you don't have something that fits, you make it fit. And that's that's the logic of the soul. And so what happens is if you have something going on in your life and it doesn't seem to fit, your soul just makes it fit. It just plugs it in. It just plugs in the gaps and makes it fit. And it doesn't matter if you logically as an adult say, well, this just doesn't make any sense. The soul just says, or your subconscious, I'm using those interchangeably right now, is saying, yes, it does, and it works very well. It's a very good reason for me to still believe that there are 4 wise men out there bringing gifts or whatever. That's just a simple example, but that's how I came up with that, and that's a short version. Okay, there's a much longer version which I won't bore you with tonight. But the idea is that you're here tonight because something happened to this lady which changed her life. I began to do sessions with other people that changed their lives. I also noticed when I work with people in my practice as a chiropractor, they were holding their adjustments much longer. Okay, they were lasting, their health was getting better. Not only were their relationships getting better, their financial situation was getting better. I was helping people through financial problems even without working on financial problems. I used to have, for example, a terrible fear of heights. I can't tell you how afraid I was of heights. My wife and I, a few years ago, went to the Grand Canyon, and I remember walking out on one of those precipices and looking straight down about a mile or whatever it is, and there was nothing there, no fence, no nothing. My wife was screaming that we didn't have life insurance. But and then I noticed I wasn't afraid. I didn't want to jump, but I wasn't afraid. I'm not stupid. I just wasn't afraid, So, whereas before I would have been crawling back, I wouldn't have been able to get near that or be able to walk at any stretch. And the interesting thing is, I was not working on that issue. I was not working on trying to get over fear of heights. It just happened over the years of doing this work. By clearing out some of the other stuff, it's like peeling the onion. I began to peel the onion, began to discover that there was other layers of stuff. And once you let go of those layers of stuff, that seems to be the missing link to prosperity, to abundance, to happiness, and to effective coaching. How many of you here are life coaches or want to be life coaches? Okay, it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of you, most of you. Okay, so you're in the right place. Logical Soul Life Coach certification is about not only becoming proficient with the technique called the Logical Soul, but also becoming proficient in some of the techniques that life coaches use. Dr. Ron Owens is going to help teach some of those in the beginning of the course. That will be Saturday morning and the first part of the afternoon. Okay. Starting at 3 is, I'm going to get into 2 modules. The Logical Soul is made up of 4 modules, or 4 steps. And they are, well, I'll just say right now, they're 4 steps. 2 of them I'm going to cover, starting one from 3 to 4 and the other from 4 to 5. You're going to get in-depth ideas about the Logical Soul interview process and the Logical Soul discovery process. And they're a little bit different than most life coaching approaches, a little bit. And you're going to understand the differences and why it's different and how to approach someone in terms of getting them to make the right statements and how you can actually test for those statements with a person. See, a lot of times you'll spend time with coaching or with doing anything. Well, I tell you what do you think will work? And then you give them feedback, and then that feedback may be good, but you really don't know how it works in real life until they go out and they beat their head against the wall and they come back and say, well, that didn't work. Right? This way you can sort of test it. You can sort of find out whether or not they're congruent with going out and making that happen. If they're not, you can find out before they leave the room, actually before the end of the session. And so that saves a lot of time, not only for them, but also for you, and it makes you much more effective. It makes you very laser targeted, to where you can target in on someone who you're working with, find out exactly what's going on with them at the moment that it's happening. So that it's not a whole lot of conjecture, it's not a whole lot of guesswork. On Sunday, that's Saturday. Sunday, starting at 9 o'clock, I cover the third phase, which is called the access phase, and this is where I really get into the meat of the matter. What's different about the logical soul is this access phase. In other words, why access may be denied, what that means, how to test for it, how to get access, the steps that you use to get access, and then once you get access, there's a process that you go through to change the hidden decision or the inner decision, which I call the resolution phase, and that's the fourth and final step of the logical soul. So it's really a four-step process. And so I'm going to give you the whole thing this first weekend. You'll be very knowledgeable about how it works and how to use it. Then we break for lunch, and we have a lunch program if anybody's interested in. After lunch, a review of the session. Actually, before lunch, I do a session, like I'm going to do one after the break here, so you get an idea of what it's about. The session that we'll do on Sunday will be a group. The group will be watching. We'll be working with someone who's a volunteer, and everybody's going to see what's going on, how the process works. After you already know how the steps are, you have a little more knowledge about what to look for. After lunch, we go to a review of the session. We talk about it. What happened? When did this happen? What did you notice was coming up as a side note to what they were saying and what was really happening? What do you think were the blocks? What do you think were the limitations? What do you think was the breakthrough? Things like that. So we're going to pick it apart a little bit, look at all the parts that made it work or not work, depending on what's happening. And then we break up at 2 o'clock into pairs, and I get you to work with each other. So there'll be one-on-one sessions where you're going to actually have hands-on, start working with someone else and start to see, using the logical soul process and a little bit of your life coach training, depending on what's merited at the time. You're going to find out what the person needs at the moment and what you can do with that. We take a break, come back, and review the experiences about that. 4 o'clock, we work in pairs again, and 5 o'clock, we have another session, and then we cover the next module, review that. Oh, by the way, the homework between the first module and the second module is you're going to have to work on some people. You're going to have to do sessions with some people. And I think probably 2 is about what we're looking at time, but we'll judge that depending on how the group is doing. February 9th and 10th we come back, and that whole weekend is about reviewing the sessions, first part, and then we go the rest of the weekend on practice building. In March 22nd, there'll be another introductory session just like this one, which you will attend, and you can bring somebody who's interested in doing the training themselves, if you like. But you're going to be there and helping. This will be part of your process of learning, is to teach what you've learned. I found the best way to learn is to just help other people. In other words, assist somebody else. Just like during this weekend, I'm going to have some people who were certified a few years ago. Beata is one of them. Some of you probably know Beata. She'll be helping out. And you'll be helping others to look at that. It'll be a great review, and also you're going to be teaching what you've learned, and there'll be some other hands-on things, and you'll be able to work in pairs yourself and do that type of work. So.
But I noticed the last group we had, that's why I bring this up, and because if we wouldn't have the block we have, we wouldn't be sitting here, right? So there is something in all of us, and it will show up. And how it will show up is that some of us want to leave, some of us will have resistance, some of us will make him bad or her bad, and that's normal. And we really need to know that. And to use it actually. How we do it in relationships is we leave someone if it doesn't fit. Or if we're more committed, we try to work on it. But what's really helpful is, like, if I don't like you, for instance, something happens to me with you, and you trigger me, it would be smart of me to say, okay, in a session. And then I should say something like, okay, when I see her this happens, and then use that. I mean, I couldn't even pay you for you triggering me, right? I couldn't ask someone, hey, come in and trigger me. Here you are, you know? But it's really painful. And actually then you're ashamed, you're afraid. And because I can't figure it out, I won't probably do it. But I have done it for the last 20 years? That I know, I started to trust that process. What I invite you to do is to trust. And the other one is, some of us we know each other for a few years now, and some of us we don't. But if you have the courage or the commitment, it's like a marriage, and we could commit to each other for a while, for 3 months, and say, I'm going to be committed. I will not leave. I will trust this process. And I know I will be ashamed, afraid, whatever, angry, and I will bring it here. I will not attack anyone. I will not hide. I will just state my feeling and to be responsible and use it. And that's what I would like you to do. That to get the most out of it. Because last time we had a very good friend, and Mike reminded me, it took us a lot of energy to keep her present. But because we didn't make this agreement in the beginning, it looked like, oh, it just happened because of her. And no, it would have happened anyhow. It was always there in her life. But we forget, and I think, oh, it's because of you. If you wouldn't be here, my life would just be perfect. Right? No, it would be something else. So that's my invitation.
Great. Very good. Thank you very much. Very, very important what she was talking about, by the way. When I was a meditation teacher, TM, we used to call it unstressing. Oh, they're just unstressing. Everything was unstressing. Here, it's very powerful, and what you're saying is true, because now we have tools that when something comes up, generally speaking, who is present for every time you've ever been upset? Who's always there? You, right? So if you're always present every time you're upset or negativity happens in your life, guess what? You're the one who can look at that and make the change happen. And if you're willing to look at that, this is probably the most powerful technique you can use to unfold and to peel that layer and come out with a true understanding of what happiness is about, instead of some glossed over technique that you use to sort of get by, if you know what I mean. I mean, there's a lot of ways where you can make things better. There's a lot of ways of getting out of pain. This is not about getting out of pain. It's about short suffering. Okay? Short suffering means you feel a pain, it's done. It's like, getting a shot or something, except we don't use needles. So, short suffering, and I never like to suffer. I hate suffering. So does she. And so because of that, we use this work constantly. What's going on? Okay, well, this. And also there's some techniques for what we call psychic first aid. That you can use to sort of overcome just about any crisis that's happening to you. This is part of the course. This is part of the training that you'll get as well. So, any other questions, or you had something else to say?
Yeah.
Come on.
I am so grateful that you were chosen to get this work, because I know we wouldn't have never made it in our marriage without it work, ever. I don't know how people ever said married. I have no idea. There was no chance with me. I had so much stuff coming up all the time, and I always thought it's his fault. Always. I think we are made that way. That we don't look inside, we look outside. And with this work, I could see where it really came from. It was never ever his fault. So I am very grateful. And we have a commitment to speak. And I don't like to say the bad stuff. I want to say the nice things about you, and not the other thing. So we have a commitment to speak it, and then I ask him to beg me to really tell him, because I don't want to tell him. And that works really well. Beg me, So.
Yeah, you came home one day and said, "Here, let me tell you about your character defect."
Begging.
And I laughed a little bit, and then he says, "Okay, well, yeah." She finally got me to go, "Please tell me my character defects, please." That was always fun.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I could get to the point where I could do that.
Yeah.
There was a point where I couldn't actually. career. So yeah, it takes courage to look at your stuff, and everybody's got stuff. And believe it or not, a lot of that stuff's not even yours, which is a real awakening. Which is actually, once you start really looking at it and delving into where it comes from and what's happening, it's just like being in stormy weather. It seems stormy, but really, when you go inside, there's no storm. It's just you're inside, and so it's just weather. I mean, outside the weather is what? Outer space, and it's always calm or whatever. So weather is always changeable. Yourself, who you are, your divinity is always stable, is always present, is always absolute, and that never changes. So there's always a part of you that never changes. As a wave, you're always looking like there's always drama as a wave. When you become the ocean, guess what? It's quiet, it's vast, it's eternal, and you slip into that. So, any other questions? Any other comments?
You said feelings and short suffering. In the old days, I would say my feelings, I would get stuck there. I lived there for weeks because I wanted to be authentic. So I lived in my pain. And what logical soul is, you take your feeling like an elevator and it gets you back to the first time you felt this way. So you use it very intelligently. It has a perfectly good purpose, this feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I call it rocket fuel for transformation. So feelings are good. Drama is good. It's just what happens is that we come up with, where's another marker here that works? Here's one. Looks like it might work. See, emotions and drama is fine, but then we come up with something called stories. This is a term Landmark Forum uses a lot. There's the truth, and then there are stories. Okay?
There's an event.
Yeah. The truth is, we had a misunderstanding, Renee, let's just say. The story is that you're a bad person.
And you suck.
Well, at least we are in agreement. All right, so the stories are just, it's not the truth, it's just a story. And all this emotion is built around stories. I mean, look at politics. I mean, or world events or anything. It's just stories. And so, with Logical Soul, we help to discover what is our story. If you believe something to be true, that doesn't mean it's true. That just means you believe it to be true. That's your story. That's what's going on. And then you begin to look at why that's important for you to believe that in your life. Once you discover the importance and why there's a very good reason why you believe that, suddenly the ego has no foundation anymore. It just sort of says, oh, okay, you caught me. You know? And then it just sort of gradually just lets go a little bit until you're able to sort of see beyond the story, get to the truth. And the truth is a lot more satisfying. It's a lot more fulfilling, and you're happier. I mean, you feel grander and more grandiose when you have stories, right? Well, the whole world is against me. You know, the CIA is tapping my phone, and everybody's out to get me. You know, that's a story, but it makes you feel bigger. Actually, I felt that way one time, and then I woke up to the fact somebody said, "You're just not that important." It was like suddenly, what? What do you mean I'm not that important? They're tapping. And then I began to realize that he was right. Why would they have any incentive to tap my phone or to find out what I was doing or to go out? It's like suddenly, that was a breakthrough for me. I hate to admit it was like 15, 20 years ago. But the point is that there's stories that run our lives. And these stories keep us stuck constantly in some reality that we're running on. Any other questions? I don't want to monopolize the conversation here. Anybody have any questions? And then we'll take a break. Anybody want to echo any of their experiences?
Your stories represent as well, another metaphor for it, your stories represent all the decisions you've made about what life is.
Your stories are a combination of decisions that you've made about life, yes.
Which makes perfect sense.
Which make perfect sense to you because, see, decisions themselves are very dry. But stories built around those decisions are like points on a picture. If you used to connect the dots and draw this picture when you were a kid. Decisions are like the dots. Stories are like the gestalt of that picture, what comes out when you see the whole thing. You see the dots and it looks like a picture. It's like when you're looking at clouds. Well, that looks like a Linus is looking up in the clouds and saying, "Well, I'm seeing Aristotle talking to Plato, and they're talking about the reality of this and that and the other." And Charlie Brown looks up and says, "Well, I'd say a doggy and a horsey." You know, so everybody sees some different picture with the same dots. It's just different appearances. So, good point. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, let's take a break. Let's take about 10 minutes and then we'll come back.